Hello and welcome back to the basement. In this episode, we are going to tackle a lot of little fine details to refine the body and get it ready for finish. We're also going to attack the pickguard and the control cavity on the back and its cover plate. So with that, let's get after it. All right, so I've got a dilemma here, and rather than play you my live in-the-moment thought process here, I'll just kind of give you the highlights. So originally, I wanted to do a stacked control layout, so that'd be volume tone for each pickup. So one for the neck, one for the bridge, and then have a series parallel toggle switch somewhere in between. Problem is I could not find dual concentric pots with long shafts, long threaded shafts. The reason why I need long threaded shafts is I have to go through the body as well as the pickguard for these pots. And I just go ahead and commit to it right here and start drilling holes for them, knowing that I'm going to have an issue later and just figuring I'll figure it out. So that ended up being a problem, and it caused me to have to kind of rethink my layout and also my wiring strategy. So because I couldn't find the dual concentric pots that had long enough threaded shafts, I had to abandon that, and you'll see what I end up coming up with a little bit later. But right now I'm getting started on kind of laying out where the actual control cavity is going to be, and I think I'll narrate this at some point else in the video as well, but I want to have extra space here in case I want to switch this over to an active circuit. So for right now, I'm wiring it up as a passive circuit with the room to add either a 9 or an 18 volt preamp later. So now I've got the pickup cavity kind of laid out, and I know how far back into the body I need to push it to avoid the roundovers. I'm getting my 3/8, I believe it's 3/8 inch roundover I end up using. I'm getting it dialed in on the router table before taking it to the guitar body. And here we go, giving it the 3/8 inch roundover. Wow, it's amazing what a little roundover will do. Still got a lot of shaping to do. I got a comfort carve to put in right here. I got a forearm carve to put right here. Probably not going to be that pronounced. That's really it. I'm just ready for a whole boatload of sanding. But I need to do the control cavity next, I think. And then I'll be done with all the routing. And by the way, I've made up, shoot, will I have enough? Dude, if I'm lucky, I'll be able to get a control plate. So here I'm starting to make the templates to do the routes. So I start off by darkening my cut lines so that I can then just take some copy paper and trace it out. So I want to have, it's basically two separate routes. I've got one for the cover plate that's going to only go down the thickness of the cover plate, and then I've got the actual control cavity, and you'll notice the shapes are slightly different. The actual control cavity is smaller than the cover plate for obvious reasons. I want a lip or a shoulder for that cover plate to sit on, and I also want some attachment points that are wider than just the lip. So I left 3 spots where I can attach some thin 4mm neodymium magnets later. And then I start making my templates based on that. So after I get them all traced out onto some MDF, I'm off to the scroll saw, and I just kind of rough them out on the scroll saw. So once I get everything roughed out on the scroll saw, I then take it over back to the bench, and I start kind of refining the shape. So usually when I make the cuts on any kind of a saw, I get close up to the line, especially when making templates, and then I kind of use files and rasps and sandpaper to get all the way up to it. So now I got to set up the body to start hogging out the bulk of the material. You don't want to use a router just to take out all the material. You have to do dozens of passes, and I'd rather burn up a Forstner bit in this case than burn up a nice pattern bit on my router. So most of the time I'll just do this. I'll take a Forstner bit or a paddle bit and start hogging out the bulk of the material, so there's less work that the router needs to do. So I got that set up. I start routing it out. I'm doing the internal cavity first, and I probably do 4 passes. It's hard to tell by going back and looking at the footage because I can't really see how many times I'm adjusting the depth, but I'm using the plunge cut router to just kind of sneak up on that final depth and ride that template until I get enough of a surface already hogged out so I can ride the previous cut with that bearing. Now I'm setting up the smaller one, this for the actual cover plate, and then I realize I don't have, in order to make the cut that shallow with the bit that I have, I don't have a thick enough template for the bearing to ride on. So I double up the templates. I grab I think a 1/2 inch piece of MDF, and I use the first thinner MDF template to make the same identical cut in the 1/2 inch, and then I put the two together, and that gives me enough of a surface to ride that bearing on to make that cut. Alright, that is not bad at all. Got a little chip out there, but scratch plate will cover it. So I can do a traditional jazz bass layout, which would be volume, volume, tone, and then leave my series parallel switch where it's at. So volume, volume, tone is option number 2. Option number 1, I'm thinking, well, who says I have to go on the pickguard with that control pot, or with that other pot? So I could go volume, volume, tone, or volume, volume, tone. So still have the same familiar like layout as far as the order of the pots, but this one would be kind of hanging off to the side, and that would fit perfectly within the existing control cavity. So I'm thinking, because I can't change the pickguard design because I have just enough material here to make the pickguard as originally planned. Like I can't add the length to this piece without grafting another piece on and then having the grain not match. So I really don't want to change the pickguard design. I don't have a whole lot of wiggle room with this blank material that I have here. It just kind of is what it is. So this is the good part of walking away and coming back. So I didn't make the decision last night. I didn't even come up with this idea until I came back down here and looked at it again this evening. So I'm thinking this is probably the direction that I'm going to go in. And by the time you see this video, I will have already made my decision and executed on it. But let me know in the comments what you think I should have done. Should I have enlarged the control cavity and put my third pot right here? Or should I leave the control cavity as is and put it right here? I think for tonight, I'm going to put in the comfort carve at this position, and then I'm going to put a forearm cut right about here. I got to figure out where that forearm carve is going to go, and I think that'll be the most satisfying thing that I can do this evening. I've got another thing I got to do, and that's trim this off, because that's where the neck is going to be overhanging the body. Like once I put the neck in, that's just following the neckline. So that's got to come off, and then I've got to kind of round this area back over to a cool shape. So that's going to be kind of I want to get that cut right. I want to get it perfectly perpendicular to the body, and of course straight. So I'm a little bit leery of doing it, but it needs to be done. And then I'll have to kind of figure out how this transition is going to be, whether I like it the way it is, or if I need to kind of inch it back and make it a more gradual curve down into the base of the neck pocket. All right, so now that I'm satisfied with the control layout and the control cavity, I start marking a center line across the side of the body where I'm going to put the two carves in, starting with the forearm carve. And I like to use just files and rasps and sandpaper rather than use... I bought some of those grinding wheels that go on angle grinders that are like power carving wheels. I just didn't feel like this was the right project to try those out for the very first time on. You can always remove more material, but it's way harder to put it back on once you've taken it off when you're doing something like this. So rather than make a boo-boo, I just decided to do it with hand tools. And, you know, I'm very happy with the results. Yes, it took a while longer, but that's okay. And then here I'm kind of trimming back that neck joint spot that I talked about earlier and playing around with the shape. What you see here is not going to end up being the final shape, but it's one of those iterations that work toward that final shape. So I got to figure out how I want to make this transition go. I don't need that I need to go too hard. That may be good enough. Dude, I'm so tempted to make this a set neck. But because I may need to replace the fretboard and the frets, bolt on it is. All right, so now I'm trying to clean up that neck pocket. I'm just trying to get rid of all of the router marks, being probably a little OCD on this particular part, but you know, it is what it is. And then just taking the random orbital sander to refine and finish out both the comfort carve and the forearm carve. Typically I hate sanding, but the finish sanding process on this particular guitar body, I actually enjoyed it for some reason. Not so much the pickguard, but the body, especially after doing the carves, that was fun. All right, so obviously when I used the leveling beam on the neck pocket, it was taking off a lot of the material from, you know, the vast majority of that neck pocket, but not all of it. So that's why I had to put the chisel to that last half inch or so. This is, I want to make sure that the neck pocket didn't get pitched one way or the other based on that flattening. So after I do that, then I get my little dividers, make sure that I get all of my control pots equidistant from each other. Then I poke the new hole, and yeah, all of the control holes have now been poked through the body. So now it's time to get off to the races with the final thickness sanding of the pickguard. I think this ended up being about 2.5 millimeters thick, maybe close to the 3, but it's, you know, normal pickguard thickness. So what I end up doing is, rather than making a template, which honestly was a dumb idea not to make a template, I just freehanded the cut on the outside of the lines for the paper template that I made, and kind of refine the shape from there. And then I end up using the actual guitar body routes itself for the pickup cavities as well as the neck pocket cavity to flush trim the pickguard too. Actually pretty efficient. It's just not as repeatable. And I did end up having enough material out of that pickguard blank to actually make the control cover for the control cavity, which I was very happy with. So now I'm using the neck pocket template to kind of do some layout lines on the back of it so that I can do the 6-bolt neck joint. So I just wanted to have some lines to work in to make sure that I was setting these holes in good spots, and I wanted them to be symmetrical but offset, sort of like the body, and the neck pocket slightly offset too. So lots and lots of tinkering with the bolt layout. So again, I wanted as much symmetry with the offset as I could. So once I got that figured out, I give you some nice elbow shots of me trying to drill out those thick beveled washers. I do those holes, and then I poke the regular holes using the center point from the paddle bit that I used there. So I end up testing a couple of different drill bit sizes on some scrap wood to make sure I used one that's just tight enough, but not too tight, but tight enough to match the thread pitch of the screws that I'm using for the neck. Then once I'm happy with that, I very, very cautiously start testing some more before I start drilling holes in the neck. And I actually end up using some Renaissance wax on the threads of these screws, just because I know I'm going to be having to take this neck on and off, and I don't want to strip out those threads that I'm setting. So that ended up working out pretty well. So the neck is finally mounted for the very first time with screws, which pretty exciting, honestly. Now it's time to take the neck right back off so that I can start working on getting the pickguard and the control plate situated. So I use some two-sided tape on the pickguard to set it down into place, and then I use a spiral upcut, downcut compression bit, very, very small diameter with a bottom bearing, and I use that with the pickguard cavities and the neck pocket cavities to actually use as the pattern to trim that out. Now, I wanted to end up, kind of sneaking up on the inside of that neck joint with the pickguard, hoping to cover up a small gap with the pickguard. That was really kind of a futile effort, or at least I wasn't happy enough with the result or the improvement to end up going with that route. So I could have just flush trimmed it using the pocket, and I think I actually go back and do that right here. Yep. It's actually not a bad idea anyway to have a little bit of room for wood movement. And then I use the oscillating belt sander to kind of clean up and refine the outside edges now that the pickup holes and the neck pocket holes are perfect.
Dude.
All right, so now that the pickguard is mostly sorted out, minus the bevels, I switched to the rear control cavity cover plate. And again, I probably didn't do this the best way I could have done it, so I ended up paying the price for that a little bit later on in the episode, but I eventually get there. It was a good learning experience along the way. So while the pickguard's glued down, I start making sure I transfer the holes from the body through to the pickguard.
All right, I've been mocking up hardware. So this is the bridge. I forget what the model is of Hip Shop Bridge, but it is a string through or rear mount for the strings. It's a pretty cool looking bridge. I'm not sure about the knobs. They really don't go with the bridge or anything else. I like the knobs. I just don't know if I like them on this build. So the jury's still out on the knobs. And the jury is also out on my string retainers. This is a pretty steep gap, so I may not need to do much. But in the event that I do, I want to have thought this through. So I've got these just laying on. These are hip shot style. These are not hip shots. The bridge and all the branded hardware on here is, but these string retainers are not. So I'm trying to figure that out. I do like the positioning of the tuners, and I'm probably going to mount them a little unorthodox. Let me see if I can get this neck out. Hold on. So the unorthodox way I'm going to mount these is I'm going to have these go parallel to the stripe orientations on the headstock. So rather than have them go parallel to the slant, I'm going to have them go like that. I bet from the front you didn't even notice. Maybe you did. Maybe you didn't. I don't know. But the aesthetics from the player's position of having them like that, to me, is kind of cool. So I think that's what I'm going to do.
All right, so now that I'm done playing with the hardware, it's time to kind of start really sorting some things out, particularly with the tuning machines. As I explained earlier in the clip, I'm aligning them slightly unorthodox compared to traditional styling, but I think it looks great and it's hardly noticeable from the front. Again, if I hadn't told you that that was what I did, you probably would not have noticed. But it's some of those little things that I think make the build. So now that I've gotten that stuff done, I start trying to figure out, well, how many other holes do I need to poke in this body before I start applying finish? So I start connecting the control cavity to the pickup cavities and all the other various holes that I got to do. I'm working on the jack plate now, and it's not quite, the opening in the jack plate that I ordered isn't quite thick enough to accommodate the barrel jack that I had to order with the length that I had to use to get through the body. So I start poking the holes needed for that. So it's a two-stage hole here, one for the threaded part of the barrel jack, and then one big enough to accommodate the nut and to get it, slightly recessed in there. Now I'm marking center lines very, very carefully because it's time to set the bridge. Setting the bridge now is going to be one of the most critical things to get right. This is how I'm squaring up my bridge. So I've got this line running straight down the middle, and then so I'm going off of the front string, right? So in this case it's going to be the G, and look where the mounting holes just happen to be. So now I know where to mark my holes, and based on center, so I just gotta line those up. So let me do that. All right, so now that I've got it figured out where the bridge is going to land, it's time to start poking some holes. So off comes the neck yet again, because I got to start poking holes through the body, because I want to have this, because this bridge has a string through body option. I ordered the ferrules to accommodate that, and it's time to start not only drilling the mounting holes for the bridge, but also the holes that go through the body for the strings, and then also the ferrules for the strings. So back to the drill press, getting the depth set up just right now that I've got them all marked out. And I start with the top, just doing the string holes because I can transfer that from the bridge very, very easily. And then once I do that, then I switch back to a wider drill bit and I start attacking the back of the body for the ferrules. So now that that's done, it's time to figure out where the ground lead is going to go to connect to the bridge and then drill that hole. All right, so this is where my
rear cover plate is, and it's very close. I don't like this gap. I don't like this gap. I don't like that gap. In hindsight, I went about this all wrong. If I had it to do over again, I would have cut this first and then made my template around this. I used the negative from the hole. I used what I cut out of the hole to make this, which was not a good idea in hindsight. So let me see, where is that piece? I don't know where that piece went. Bottom line, instead of using this, which is what I made the hole with, I didn't. I used what came out of this hole, which is this piece here. I used this. I didn't like how it turned out because obviously I had taken a file and refined this. I should have used this rather than this. I figured if I used this and then made my cutout piece bigger and then sanded it down, it'd be fine. That was the wrong approach. So in hindsight, I should have used this, but I didn't. So here's where I'm at. I'm going to use magnets, not screws. Everything I could do is make this even smaller and then put some edge binding on it. I don't have any veneer to use, I don't think. This is all I have in the way of veneer. It's cigar box veneers. Some are super thin, some are kind of thicker. So I don't have anything big enough to do a continuous piece. I don't need a ton of veneer. I'd have to make this gap equidistant, and I'd probably be right back in the same spot I am right now. So I don't know what the right fix is for this, because it's still kind of an unrefined shape. The other thing I could do is scrap this piece and start all over, which means I'd have to get back out the flattening jig and cut one of these pieces right here, which to me feels like a waste of material. I mean, it's not a waste of material because I'd be fixing a problem, but I can't get a whole nother pickguard out of this if I do that. So I don't know. I could always save the one that I made. I could save this one and make a template and use this on another guitar, so I would not be wasting the material. Or I could just deal with the gap.
So again, I probably could have left this the way that it was and it would have been fine. I just knew that I could get a better result if I put in some more effort. And I've put this much effort in so far, why not go the extra mile? And then also I get to try something new, something I haven't done. So I've never really tried to edge bind something like this, and I figured it'd be potentially a cool aesthetic touch. Granted, you'd have to look really, really hard to see it, but if you're the owner of this bass and you ever take the control cover off, you will notice it, if you're looking for it. Again, the effort probably isn't worth it. If I was doing this to make money and time was money, it's probably would not be a worthwhile endeavor. But again, this is a hobby, it's fun, and every opportunity I have to try something new that I haven't done is an opportunity to learn and grow. So that's why I decided to go ahead and do it. So once I got the shape kind of refined to have an even reveal all the way around, I start cutting strips with the grain of the cigar box veneer, and I start soaking it in water. And because I'm using water, I can't use CA glue to attach it, so I end up using regular wood glue, just tight bond number 2, and I start pretending I am edge binding a guitar with this little cover plate with a ton of little strips of masking tape to attach it and serve as clamps. So that's essentially the methodology here. Again, lots of effort for not that noticeable of a detail, but I'm happy I did it. One of the things I found that was problematic with this was obviously cigar boxes are usually made out of Spanish cedar, which is a very brittle wood. It's not very hard, and it's not very durable either. So I ended up having to redo this a couple of different times. So because I was trying to cut the strips oversized, and then when I go to tape them on, they would split with the grain, because I decided to make my cuts with the grain rather than across the grain, which makes sense, I guess. And ultimately that ended up causing me to have to redo it a couple of times. And then I found that the cigar box veneer, that cedar, was so soft that some of it came off. You know, just ripped the grain, just ripped the wood fibers apart with the masking tape that I used. Again, it wasn't bad though. It definitely sealed up that gap way tighter with no wiggle, and pretty happy with that. So now that that's all sorted out, now it's time to flush up all of the veneers that I glued and final sand it. Again, very, very small detail. All right, so once I get the rear cover plate mostly level sanded, I switch back over to the Pickguard, and now I am sanding in the bevels by hand because I just don't want a chance putting this on the router table with a 45-degree chamfer bit. Even a bearing pattern bit would have been fairly safe. I would have had to have made a template in order to have enough surface area for the bearing to ride on. But the thought of that bit catching some of this cross grain brittle wood and tearing a chunk out just didn't sit well with me. So I decided to do it the hard way, just to make sure I was not going to have to remake the Pickguard. And here I am getting ready to set the magnets, or at least testing the magnets. I want to make sure on one of these test pieces of the same material that the Pickguard and the cover plate are made out of, that the end mill bit that I bought for this job was going to do it without tear out, and it did. So I put the end mill bit in to drill the flat holes into the body, and then I put some finish nails into the centers of those holes and nipped them off with some nippers, some dikes, and then use that to transfer some dents over to the cover plate, so I could then use that to mark center of where to poke those holes for the magnets on the cover plate. Now, I chose to use an end mill because it's perfectly flat on the end versus a drill bit, which would either be kind of pointed at the end or have a brad point, which would poke through. So I wanted a flat bottom hole, and an end mill is really the only way to go. So once I do that, then I start putting the neodymium magnets in there, and I am very, very careful to super glue them in, and then make sure that I don't have the poles opposed in the incorrect orientation when I put them into the cover plate.
It works.
Full disclosure, sliding that cover plate into place and hearing it click was one of the most satisfying parts of this build. I'll just be real with you. I probably did that 10 times off camera like a dork. But yeah, now it's time to start doing some of the finish sanding. This is the first round. I'm not going to bore you with a ton of it. I start working my way up through the grits, starting with 80 grit, just to try and chase out any of the workbench marks from all the work that I've been doing. Obviously, I do the roundovers, I do the carves, and everything I can with the random orbit sander. And then everything I can't reach with that, I do by hand. I start with 80 grit, go to 120, then 220, and then I wipe it down with some naphtha to show off the grain that I'm about to stain blue. All right, it was a long episode, I know, but we got a lot done in this episode. So join me next time down here in the basement where we start working on the headstock inlay and final preparations for finish. So thanks again so much for watching. I appreciate all your support, all the encouragement, and we'll see you next time down here in the basement.